Well, everybody, welcome. So glad you could be here. And why don't let's just try to make this more of a conversation. I mean, given the number of people in this room, and just to help manage expectations, it'll be about an hour, a little over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. So, and I appreciate you dedicating the time today. I know everybody's busy, and this time of year is getting busier and busier, so appreciate that. All right. What we're going to do today is I'm going to describe why is this important to me. Why is a financial nerd up here talking about charity, philanthropy, or whatever, and explain why it's important to me. And then go through the purpose of this presentation, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page so that when you complete the assessment that it meets your expectations, and make sure that we're on the same page. And then we're going to go through the steps of how we're going to achieve the purpose of the presentation. And there are some certain assumptions that I've made about you, and because you're here, who you are, and I also want to go through those so that we start off headed in the same direction. Okay. Now, please just go ahead and ask any questions during the presentation rather than save them until the end. And at the end, I would like to ask for some takeaways or some contributions of stories that may help support or disagree with what I have to say. And so I'd like to ask for some takeaways and a call to action. And then there are 3 books from which I will be reading today and to support some points. And your takeaway is to sign up for one of these books, and we will get them to you. These are 3 books that I think are, well worth the read. Any of them. And they're different, though, and I'll explain their differences. Okay, so why am I speaking? Philanthropy, I have not talked about this a whole lot in the community in the last 28 years, but philanthropy was my family's second industry. Or second business, rather. In the late 1950s, my step-grandfather and grandmother set up a private foundation. And it's now, I checked a few years ago, and it's in the $450, $500 million range right now. So I grew up with our family talking about philanthropy. I grew up with my grandmother as president of this foundation. They were early supporters of Mother Teresa, for example. My father was the second president. They were geared towards international giving. Now the foundation is domestic. It has an independent board, so the family really doesn't do much with the foundation. Not participant, it's an independent board, and partly it's so large, a foundation. And but we talked about this stuff at home, and I'm gonna tell some stories of things that I learned through my experiences growing up, and which I think will help. It's I even when I was in business school, getting my MBA, the foundation asked me to assess an organization in Charlottesville, Virginia, and so I did so, and I discovered that they had $100,000 that they were either wasting or refusing to use in a way that they could have done more to meet their mission, and pointed it out to them, showed them, and asked, so what are you going to do? You're going to change? You're going to do this? And they said, no, we still want the grant, the foundation. So I ended up recommending against the grant, for example. So still involved in it all my life, and hearing my father's stories. And he was my first teacher about the difference between charity and philanthropy. Have received some third-party encouragement. The presentation today is a revised version of a presentation that I've given in the past. For example, in Birmingham, the Red Mountain Theater used their theater, invited some nonprofits, and they had their board members come and listen to this presentation. And the encouragement that I received from that was some of the people said that they had national figures come into town and try to draw a distinction between charity and philanthropy and effective giving. And they had not really been successful in doing so, but they thought that there was some well, that maybe this had done that and made those distinctions clearer for the audience. Knight Kiplinger of the Kiplinger Organization, Changing Times, publisher of Tax Report. Some of you may be familiar with that organization in Washington, D.C. Knight was visiting Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, and I was driving him around and gave some of this presentation or the content to him. We were talking, and he said, as a publisher of books, he said, "Charlie, I think you may have a book in you." Well, there is no book, but you're gonna hear this. And also in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Community Foundation there sponsored the presentation, and they invited a university and some nonprofits and all, and not because the people weren't already there and the inclination and all, but the presentation did help inspire a large donation. This is not about giving more money, by the way, but that was a consequence that out of focus, that a dream program was fully funded. And so that has been a great encouragement to just continue to be out here, because I have some controversial things to say, and to continue to be out there and be controversial the encouragement has helped. Now, also, this is important because of the research that Diana and I have done, or through the Heritage Institute, is that the transference of family values is very much influenced by philanthropy or charity, and can be. So this whole topic in a family is very important. And so, since I have a family, Kent's my son, by the way, and I have a story about Kent and me doing something, so I'm going to forewarn Kent. And so that's really, so the family situation and teaching and parenting around money and values is very important. It's one of the core areas of my life. And what we do here is we're essentially, if we pull the covers away, just say, all right, here's what we do. Ultimately, we are fulfillment advisors. And fulfillment planning is helping. It's the integrated process of helping individuals and families raise their sense of satisfaction in the core areas of their lives, their self-defined core areas of lives that are essential to their definition of fulfillment. So it's the raising the sense of satisfaction in the self-identified core areas of life that are essential to their definition of fulfillment, that journey toward fulfillment. And part of that for me is my faith is a core area of my life too, and giving and helping the poor, the widows, and the orphans, and giving to others, because it's not ours, it's His. And so that's sort of the why this is such an important issue, and I think it's something that others may have as important to them. Now, the purpose of this presentation is to help increase the effectiveness of giving. And everybody around this table, and I'm going to talk about that, of the influential people in this resource-poor state. But it's not. If you leave this presentation or this discussion thinking that I think charity is bad, I've miscommunicated. I think charity is very good. It's just that philanthropy is better. Okay? Now, Alabama, for those of you who I know it was in the media recently, Alabama and Birmingham were, by the Chronicle of Philanthropy, named as the third most generous, giving city or state in the country. And it's fine, and that's done as a percentage of our income. We are the third highest givers in the country. I think that's remarkable. But that's the good news. The bad news is we may not have a lot more that this state is going to be giving, or this community is going to be giving, increasing our giving. So the future is helping improve the effectiveness of that giving. That's where the greatest advancement can be, and that's also part of why this is important. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this purpose? Well, I've got 19 examples of the differences between charity and philanthropy, or differences in behavior. Now, some of them are mistakes, common mistakes that givers make. Another, maybe it's additive to charity. Philanthropy, when you move to philanthropy, you're adding to, you have to go through this charitable stage before you can get to the philanthropy. Or the philanthropy behavior is an alternative to the charitable behavior. Okay, so those are the different categories that those 19 examples. I'm going to tell some personal stories and some other stories, other people's stories as well, to prove some of these points. And I hope I create some discomfort here. The room is a little chilly perhaps beginning, so hopefully, talking about money, sex, and religion, things can get warm. So hopefully we're going to create some warmth here and anxiety in a little bit different way. And we are biological organisms, and we won't change unless we feel some stress. And so I want to have a little stress here so that we can open our thinking to thinking beyond what we have been thinking. And one of our sayings here is we challenge our clients profoundly. We ask the question and have them challenge the status quo to imagine what is their wingspan and imagine things beyond the status quo. And I hope to do that today. But there are some controversial items, I will forewarn you. And then end with a process of how to move to philanthropy. Crawl before you walk and walk before you run, and actually set yourself up for success to move in this direction. Okay. So, assumptions about you. Everybody here is influential in some way, either with your friends, where you practice your faith, or where your family, your work, with the checkout lady. Everywhere you go, you can have some influence on people. You are capable of and open to change. You're here because you'd like to learn, to perhaps do something differently, or to help, in the case, Greg is an estate attorney, maybe help his clients think of this in a new way. You want to be good, if not great, at helping others. Again, you wouldn't be here if you weren't in the business of, or your trade, or your avocation to help others, just by your presence. So that's a pretty easy assumption to make. Fred, do you need some water or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Haines. I'm sorry. That's enough. Thank you.
Doing it well is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So it's so worthwhile, and it's worth the commitment. And I think that those that I see around the table are willing to make a commitment. Again, it's not about giving more. It's about giving more effectively. And last, I've been involved in this for 35 years. And I'm going to tell you about the first lesson I learned in this from my father. And it's I've made mistakes. I'm going to talk about a mistake I made a year ago on a medical mission trip. And I'm still learning. And hopefully I haven't undermined my credibility in giving this presentation. But I think it's important for us to share our mistakes, because we're all still learning how to do this better. And so you'll hear. But that's the caution. Now, let's start with the examples. The first one is, and think of an organization that you hold dear, and charity is the agency's activities appear on the society page in the newspaper or in a society blog or something like that, wherever you get your your information. And it's the classic picture of everybody, maybe holding a drink and all in the lined up of their names and all, and something about the organization. That's charity. It's good though, because a lot of things are happening with this event. One is that they're raising money, and Nancy and I attended one last week where they're trying to, and a lot of people, and they're trying to raise $250,000. And haven't heard what they did or not. But it's people getting together. It's to plan and be there and all. You have staff members and board members and volunteers and all getting together in relationship and becoming tighter with a common purpose and cause. And it's also the way that an organization begins to recruit its philanthropists. Because they have to start with it, charitable, educating the giver, and some things I'm going to talk about later. But some of those do move on to being philanthropists with some behavior that I'm going to discuss. So these events are good. Philanthropy, on the other hand, with events, is when your organization appears on the front page of the paper or a lead blog on somebody's blog. And that's when the media and people think that it's news. You're having an impact on the community. So it's moved from the picture to the story about the impact that the organization is having on the community. So that's an example of charity versus philanthropy. Next is addressing symptoms versus treating causes. This is the first story, first lesson I learned. And it's a story dating back to the late 60s. I think it was about 1969. And there was a civil war going on in Nigeria. And it's not where Boko Haram is, killing Christians and kidnapping children and stuff like that and women. But it's southeast Nigeria. And Biafra wanted to be separate from Nigeria, so they said we're going to be separate, and then Nigeria attacked. And well, it was about a 2.5-year war, but one of the things that happened is that 1 million people died in this little area, and Biafra only had 3,000 soldiers to start the war and ended with 30,000. But to have 1 million people die, you can imagine, it was starvation because they blockaded the country. And what became, for those of us who were around and reading the news, whatever, it was the Biafran babies and the starving babies there. And it became an international issue. And the Nigerians wouldn't let the Red Cross enter and help or everything. So many children were dying. Many adults were dying. And so my father came back from a meeting from the foundation. He was on the board. And I asked him, and I don't know exactly what I asked him. I don't remember that, but it was essentially, how much food did you give? How much money to buy food? Or what did you do to help? Did you give much to help the Biafran babies? And he said, no. I said, why? Why didn't you do that? I mean, international, Africa, you've done a lot of work in Africa. He sat me down and he said, Charlie, we have given money to dig wells. So what do you mean? He said, to dig wells so that these families and these people can take care of themselves better, where this blockade and things like that wouldn't have affected them as much. And it's just much like teaching somebody to fish instead of just giving them fish. He said, that's what we have done. We've some money for food, but it's primarily for digging wells. And I said, but so many children are going to die. And he said, Charlie, we think that so many children are going to live because they will avoid these famines in the future that seem to happen so often. And so we're going to save more children than if we were to just give food today that would be gone. And so that was my first lesson in, instead of giving the fish all the time, teaching them how to fish and how to make the fishing pole and all that. And I'd like to read from a book as well. And this is a book called Money Well Spent. talks about a process where you repeatedly asking why until you've gotten to the root of the question is a useful way to clarify the problem and expand the problem frame. So in other words, like a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, keep asking the question, why? Daddy or mommy, why is this? Why? And you keep answering that, but why that? And why? Until you get to the essence of the issue, the cause. Those of you who've had children, you know that happens. That's what we're talking about. And the first order of business is to make sure that you are trying to solve the right problem. People sometimes go about solving the wrong one because they do not frame the problem adequately. They may mistake symptoms for the problem itself. It's a common mistake. Okay. I should give versus wanting to give. Wow, how's that guilt relief? Is that satisfying? Now, we are in a guilt-innocent society in terms of the world, but relieving guilt is really not fulfilling. In fact, Nancy and I talked about this very morning. We talked about this presentation. I said, you know that $100 that I give to my college that has this huge endowment fund whose politics and all I don't even believe, just what the school has gone and all. I don't know why I'm giving $100 to hold a place. It's because I guess I feel guilty. I said, let's not do that anymore, okay? And so we're not going to. And my prep school, same thing. So that was out of guilt. Now, we're going to give more money to something we want to give to. And there's some different ways that we get into this guilt and we should give. I didn't say this morning in the presentation, but now I'm going to wait on this. I've got another controversial one that I thought of that get me kicked out of a meeting, perhaps, but I may say it in a little bit here. All right, so that's one. So guilt relief is not nearly as fulfilling as giving to those that you want to. And so be aware of how you're feeling about some of this stuff. No standards of gift effectiveness versus standards of evaluation. I'm going to go to money well spent again. And this is about being intentional. By the way, this book, if it didn't talk about philanthropy and didn't use sort of charitable and nonprofit words and examples, could have been a introductory book for my getting an MBA at my business school. Because it's about being intentional, it's about combining different things, and it's being good at what you do, implementation and all. But it's going to hang in there with me on this. But this is what it says about strategic philanthropy. All of this means that accomplishing philanthropic goals requires having great clarity about what those goals are and specifying indicators of success before beginning a philanthropic project. So how are we going to judge this? What do we expect? It requires designing and then implementing a plan commensurate with the resources committed to it. This in turn requires an empirical, evidence-based understanding of the external world in which the plan will operate. And it requires attending carefully to milestones to determine whether you are on the path to success with a keen eye for signals that call for mid-course corrections. I'm going to tell you about a mid-course correction later, but being ready to do that. Businesses do that too. These factors are the necessary parts of what we regard as the essential core strategic philanthropy, the concern with impact. Don't just give. There have to be standards for evaluation. Need to be standards for knowing whether it's money well given. Okay. Here's another one. Almost all passion or logic versus the combination of the two. I think we've all seen the ads with the starving child, and please give to this organization, and you see this child maybe with a tear coming down. I mean, and a very much an emotional appeal. And that is all emotion. Or you have was happening in the year 2000 with all those internet gazillionaires that were coming, and they thought they knew and what logically made sense for the nonprofits, and they came, as Nancy has said sometimes, came busting in and saying they knew how it should be done, and it made sense logically according to these absolute business plan and all. Neither of those is as effective as combining the two. And last one from this book. So what about the passion? We've got this plan and everything. What about the passion? Because we make decisions from our heart, generally. There may be some that we try. These are harder, the ones made in our mind, but it's our heart gives us the call to action. And the philanthropy comes from the heart, from the love of mankind. It is love or passion that leads philanthropists to determine their missions and set ambitious goals. But once you have determined these goals, the process becomes outcome or centered. At this point, mind and muscle, your mind and heart, come in to design and implement a strategy to achieve those goals. We all have been given gifts, and we're different. And we need to have that combination of those gifts and those approaches and all to come to the best conclusion. It should not be just heart-driven or just logic-driven. Lots of small gifts versus fewer, larger, impactful gifts. Well, back about, I think it was 12 to 13 years ago, we were launching a new service for our clients, which is helping them with the giving, this kind of stuff. And so what we did is we wanted to do some experiential learning with the staff as our launch internally. If we believe it, if we've experienced it, then we'll be better advocates and teachers and supporters of our clients in this. So we set $5,000 aside and said, we are going to give this away as a company. And so the next step was to go to the United Way, and they've got categories that they use. And we said, okay, let's talk about that, and let's pick the 3 areas that are where we have heart, and which makes sense to us as well. And so we picked the top 3. And then we self-selected and decided, okay, I'm interested in this, and I'm interested in this, and split into 3 groups, and did research to find out what might be some agencies that would be good and do a good job. And then each group picked I believe it was the top 1, and each group gave a presentation to the whole group. And then we had to make the decision, do we give $5,000 to one group, or do we split it up in some form or fashion and give smaller gifts to all 3 or 2? That is what philanthropists go through all the time. Deciding, do we make a larger, more impactful gift to one, or will the sum of smaller parts be greater than the one? The decision we made was to give it all to one and say no to 2 of them, which is a very difficult decision to make and decision to communicate. So, it's going through that process. Now, you may come up with smaller gifts, and there's a role for people. Maybe this room, generally we're part of the affluent, and so we can afford to make larger gifts. And so there is a role for the smaller gifts for other people, because it's not just about the money. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Writing checks versus following your money with the time, talents, and family. All right, writing checks and giving money and licking the envelope and putting it in the mail, there's a bit of satisfaction with that, doing something good to help some people. But what if you rolled your sleeves up and got your hands dirty and were face to face with the people that you're helping. Or you're there with your family together. Kent and I went with our church at that time to help with a house in Habitat for Humanity. And we were able, Kent, I think you had to be 16 or 18, I can't remember how old you were, to be able to go on site. 16. And so we went there. And we got to meet the lady who's going to be moving and her family into that house. And Kent got to talk to her, as did I. And then work with her, because she was working on her house as well. And then there were times when we were apart. But when we got back together, we had a discussion about, well, what was it like for you? How did it feel? What did you think? And you met the lady and made this concept of a person helping a person move into a house turned into a concrete example. And we were made to be in relationship. And so in relationship with the lady, and relationship, Kent and I, with each other, parent, child. And to hear through Kent's young, at that time, what did he see through his young eyes and hear through his young ears? And as a parent, that was very meaningful to me to see how he was doing in this journey about helping others. And Kent is a helping others person. There's that element to him, for sure. So that's an example. And we've all been given talents, and those we should offer. Serving on fundraising boards versus fundraising and working boards. This is a little bit difficult to go through, but we have let me start off with saying one of the handouts you're going to get when you leave is we've had clients that many clients have been asked to serve on boards, and we say, all right, before you agree, you need to ask these questions of the organization in 2 phases. And you'll see what I mean when you get them, when you leave. We've had some clients that decided not to be on the board, and others that were more enthusiastic about it. But one of the questions is, for example, do you have a strategic plan? Now, for some people, they say, oh my goodness, this is a rudderless ship. They don't even know where they're going. I don't know how they've accomplished what they've done without the grace of God. This is, for me, for example, no strategic plan. Wow, I can't wait to get in there and help them with their 1-page business plan and figure out, because of given what they've done already, imagine what they could do if they were focused and had some ways to evaluate what they're doing and built their board to bring in the talents to help the strategic plan work and so forth and so on. I mean, that's an exciting, but others may say, oh gosh, this is an awful situation. This is such a mess. So it's a way for you to really understand what you're getting into. Because maybe most people here have been asked to serve on a board, and you may have had different experiences, but it's had one situation where a client was asked to be on a high society board. What it turned out and said, oh my, wow, but what the organization didn't realize is that client, once she was on the board, started saying, no, now I want to be on that committee of doing things and actually being with the people we're trying to help and doing that and getting this and all. And they thought, well, wait, she's from a prominent family. We had her as our big donor kind of person, and with her family and the prominence of her family, that this having her name on there was going to, this is the society, and other people around her were saying, you're on that board, oh gosh, the people, the sort of high society kind of stuff, and she was not that way. So now, there are roles for people to put their names on boards to give it credibility. And there are roles when people don't have time or don't make time, roles for that. That's not as rewarding, though, if you're a member of a board that does do fundraising, but also is a working board. And it can be a junior board, where a junior boards typically do a lot of fundraising, but they tend to do the work that staff might do with other organizations. And that's part of getting together, knowing each other, the commitment, and that is more fun than maybe signing letters. fundraising letters. So, but know yourself. You know, where are you going to get the most pleasure and fulfillment? Reactive versus proactive. We had a client where he said, all right, let's look at your tax return, where you delineated your donations, where they appear. And let's see if we can derive some themes to your giving. And so we gave the silence, and she was looking at all the organizations to which she'd given in tears. Tears started welling up in her eyes, and said, well, tell me what's happening. Tell me more about how you're feeling. And she said, this says more about who my friends are than who I am. And she just realized that her giving was just, there's no theme, no purpose, just reactive. And very unfulfilling in thinking about it. But at least she recognized it. I'll give to yours if you give to mine. I'm sure nobody's ever done that, been asked to give money and then, okay, now I can go after them to donate to mine. Well, you might as well just give to yours and let them give to theirs. You haven't accomplished anything other than maybe you've irritated each other or you've let them know that these are important to say, I need to ask you if you just do this or whatever. It's not very fulfilling. Okay? But there's some other ways to go about it. And later I have a how do you try to raise money for an organization that means a lot to you in a gentle and respectful way. Versus focus on a few issues of geography and know the players' network and the efficacy of the agents. All right. We can debate the definition of success, but I don't know too many organizations or people who are successful who aren't focused. And so with philanthropy, I'm going to say I'm a strong advocate of focus and getting to know the field within which you are working. An example, Nancy and I, every 2 years, spend some time with my college roommates and spouses, and we're going to Charleston, South Carolina. And the original plan was for the spouse of one of my roommates, who happened to have the homeless as one of her main area that she helped with in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Nancy and I have a history of, and when we met, working with the homeless. And so it's one of the things that helped us get together and understand each other. And just an important area to both of us. And so the three of us we did some research and found 2 agencies that were what we thought looked like they were really good. And it might offer some ideas for Birmingham, and we might be able to offer some ideas to them. And so we arranged to visit them one morning, but then the plans changed, and I don't know, it was bike riding or something that more people wanted to do, and so we ended up not doing it. But there are different ways to visit a city, and I throw that out as an example that when you go somewhere and you're focused on whether it's the environment or education or whatever area it is, you can look at another city because you may have gone to some meetings where you met some people from these other cities, and so at an environment meeting, if that's your area of interest, and you're establishing your network the same way you do in business or other areas, and know what the issues are and who's doing good work, because I can guarantee you that in Birmingham does not have a monopoly on the best ideas in the different areas of philanthropy. No city has a monopoly on the best ideas, so I'm not meaning to be disparaging towards Birmingham. But we do have some good ideas that some other people could use. So you need to know what you're doing, know the people. Okay. Now, one of the handouts will be a site visit checklist, some things to do before the site visit, and then afterwards. Okay, and we'll give that to you on the way out. One sign of a charitable relationship is when you have a relationship with the development officer. And in the morning session, we had a lady who is in charge for Alabama of development for a national, very large nonprofit. And she was shaking her head like this during this part of the presentation and some others. If you have a relationship with a development officer, you have more of a charitable relationship. If you have a relationship with the organization through the program person, program director, then you have a philanthropic relationship because you're aware of the inner issues and the causes and all that. I mean, a deeper relationship with that area and the people that you're trying to help. So that's one sign. And there's some reasons for this that are related, is the issue of annual gifts versus multi-year commitment. Annual gifts are good. It dominates the fundraising activities of a nonprofit typically, and that's how most of their giving is from annual giving, annual givers. However, if you know your stuff, you know what you're doing, you may have participated, you're on the board, you may know elements of their strategic plan, you're making a multi-year commitment to that organization. And it's happened to me one time, made a 3-year commitment to an organization, and it was a technology investment that could have been transformational to the organization so that they knew they sort of put their fundraising in the technology, making it much easier, their membership, management, all kinds of things. And it was nerdy for me, so I enjoyed it, technology. And so I said, okay, here we go. First year, it didn't work. The implementation was poor. The software company had put them together with a bad consultant to implement this and enter the data and design the output and all this stuff. And so, but instead of having the development officer after the first year say, well, we've had some issues with it, we're working on it, we're getting the steps, and you can just imagine maybe what I might have been told had it been, and by the way, would you help us fund this next year, this technology? And the conversation I had was, this is not working. We're really struggling with this. And I know we've got 2 more years on this commitment. Will you help us get some additional resources or whatever to help us work through this and fix this situation? That's philanthropy. The conversations have great high integrity, candor, trust. You're speaking the same language. The superficial stuff is not part of the conversation. You're in the ditch together trying to figure out how to make this work. And so if you're working with the program people. Now, also, if more people made multi-year commitments, and this was when Melissa was going like this, the resources that would be liberated in the organization for not having to do this annual campaign. They still get in touch with people just because we're to be in relationship, but the resources that would liberate for development work and planned giving and other things that law firms can help with and accounting firms and firms like ours, I mean, it just would help the organization. So you're really helping, you're giving the gift of a commitment, but you're also giving a gift of freeing up time. And they can be more certain with their budgeting and more certain with what they're doing and what they can count on or feel they can count on. And these organizations typically are, they're in the weeds. They've got things coming at them all the time, and they don't have time to think strategically. But if they've got a bunch of multi-year commitments, they can raise their heads and look out there, farther in the future, and will help them. Family not involved versus family involved. Well, I mentioned some of that with Kent, with the the Habitat for Humanity, but Kent and my other children have been through a process that Diana is now helping us with, and that is helping the firm with, is the heritage process, a family meeting, things like that. And Kent worked on a project with his siblings, and again, it takes work, it takes commitment, there are frustrations, there are positives, but working together to give a certain amount of money. And I was not involved in that process, and they were in control of it. They had some support. But when they finally made their decisions and the organizations that they picked, and having some discussions about it. In fact, Kent has sent me a book related, on Instagram, that he got a signed book from this author that is one of the best communicators about his field of interest. And am I stating it correctly? And so, but I know that about him now, and I didn't know as much about that before. And so by going through that process with your children, letting them perhaps go through it with no strings attached, truly is a gift. And then what you get back. Charlie Collier, the Senior Development Officer at Harvard, told a story about one of his clients. And he said the grandparents and the grandchildren, excluding the natural enemy of both, the parents, would go the day after Thanksgiving, would go on site visits. And they'd go at 3 a.m, come back for lunch, and talk about what the children saw and what they saw. And for the grandparents to hear what the grandchildren saw, heard, felt, and felt compelled to do. And they gave their presentation, and there are all kinds of things you can say, all right, teaching them how to give a presentation, what's important, or what are we going to look for when we go there, and all this teaching about how to evaluate a nonprofit. And then to come back and share that. Now, some things from a grandparenting or parenting perspective come, all right, we're a giving family. Has that value been transferred to the next generation? You'll hear that, yes or no. How do they think about this? This is how we do as a family, yes or no. So it's very much a wonderful parenting and grandparenting experience. And those of you who are grandparents, never underestimate the impact grandparents can have. Children giving money versus giving time. Well, I'm not a big fan of with the allowance or money of doing 1/3 for charity, 1/3 for spending, 1/3 for savings. First of all, children of the ages where that's usually used aren't mentally developed well enough to understand the concept of money and what it means and what this whole process is trying to teach. They're just not there. And it's used at the wrong age, if ever there is a good age for it. But there's another reason, and that reason showed up in a focus group that I happen to be part of. I was at a Council of Foundations meeting, and every year they have a family foundation meeting, and I happened to be there representing a foundation client. And they, because of the family's foundation and the independent private foundation, they asked me to be part of a focus group at the meeting. And it was an author who was writing a book on how to raise good stewards. And so one of the questions the author asked us was, what do you remember about how much money your parents gave or did with philanthropy and all? And we started looking at each other, and this is as your children, and looking at it was sort of, do you want me to tell her, or do you want to tell her, and that kind of stuff. So I was looking around, and finally somebody said, I don't remember anything about the money. And then the rest of us said, I don't either. I mean, no. So, well, what did you remember? So, well, I remember doing things, helping people with actions, being with them, experiences. That's what I remember as a child. And one of my stories is in 7th and 8th grade. I volunteered at a deaf and blind house. And my voice hadn't changed at this point in my life, late bloomer. And so I was reading to a blind lady. And it was time to go, and they said, okay, it's time to go. And so I told her that I had to go and finish maybe the paragraph or something. And she, sweet lady, said to me, "You're the sweetest little girl I have ever met." And there I was with my classmates and guys, and oh gosh. So I remember that story for a couple of reasons. Abject, profound embarrassment. But it was also, I loved going there. And went there
you have on?
What did I have on? She was blind. She couldn't see. And so, but you would love to go there and help out. But I don't know how much my parents gave to that, or if they even gave, really, frankly. But that's why I enjoyed going there. So that's what, Kent probably has no idea about how much, and we may not have even talked about how much did we give for Habitat for Humanity. That wasn't the important part of it. It could have been $5. It's still a gift. But we had some other things in mind for that. So just remember that with children, it's going there with them and doing things together as a family that they will remember. All right, this is kind of a tough one to describe, perhaps, because many of us, whether it's are taught to be not brag about our giving or anything like that. And this is a way that you can be humble, yet still help others, help an organization. So, keeping secret your areas of focus and agencies are giving and promoting them. What you're doing about talking to your friends about an organization that you are, or an activity in which you're engaged, is inviting them to experience the same joy that you experience with this organization. Not imposing it on them, that they should love this agency or this activity more than anything else in the world because they have their own likes and all. But it's talking to them about it. So it's an invitation. And if you do it with a humble spirit, you don't have to talk about how much you're giving or anything like that, but what it means to you and who it serves, the agency serves, and find out if that is something of interest to the other person. I think that's important. And there are a lot of family foundations around here, especially the ones that are new and learning some of this stuff. They will not, although it is public information and appears 2 years after the fact, where they give and areas, but they don't talk about their giving very much. And I verified this morning that a good part of it is because they're not experienced with grant making, they're not sort of proud or they're insecure about the efficacy of their grants, so they don't want to talk about drawing attention to it and then exposing them as making mistakes. Well, you're going to hear a mistake that I made in just a moment. I think, and I said before, we need to share those mistakes because things that happen in our lives are gifts when we make mistakes and we can learn from them, and we're now armed and have something that we can use to help others avoid the same mistake or get through the situation. And so it's okay to make mistakes, and with this you need to take risks. Penicillin was developed because the Rockefeller Foundation took a big risk. Penicillin was invented or discovered in Great Britain during World War II. But they didn't have the resources, or nobody wanted to take the risk. And philanthropy, by the way, is an American phenomenon, the nonprofit world and all. Now the rest of the world is doing some, Germany and some others, and it's growing as an industry in other countries, but philanthropy is an American industry by and large. And so they had to go to the Rockefellers to say, would you put up the money to develop this drug to save lives? And it's a risk. We think it will work, but we're not sure. And they did, and hence we have penicillin. So you have to take risks, and what comes with that is failure does happen. In the venture capital industry, the statistics are one company makes up for all the losses and all the other stuff of the other companies. So here, you got to take 10 risks to have a success to compensate for all the other losses. But that's just part of this. Next is you're in the credit spotlight versus the sustainer in the system. Now, I sound as if I helped write some of that fancy language book here when I say sustainer in the system, but this is what I mean. I made a mistake a year ago in Egypt, where we were on a medical mission trip, and brought some paper and some crayons for the children. And it was a medical mission trip. I wasn't going to have a booth there and to help people with their financial plans. I mean, that was just not going to be my role. And so I had some other roles, and so the team decided, given my maturity level, that I was well suited to work with the children. And so it was the best match that we had. And so I had the paper and crayons and brought them out there and worked with them, coloring and things like that. And a sad story, parenthetically, I'd like to say is one of the little boys, and we went there 3 months after the Second Revolution, so there's still a lot of tanks and things around and soldiers and armored personnel carriers. And I was happened to be doing some history, blood pressure work and all, and had a volunteer ask me to come out. And a little boy gave me a picture that he had done, and instead of being a bicycle or an airplane or something, it was a tank. So it's kind of a sad but wonderful experience. He drew a picture of what he had seen, what he was seeing, and so it just sort of the lost innocence manifested in that picture. Yet he was giving me his picture that he had done, and he was so proud of it. But the mistake I made, though, even though that was a very wonderful experience for me and maybe for him, it would have been much better had I given the volunteers from that church where the clinic was, let them take it out to the children and have that experience and beginning to build relationship. Because Nancy and I were going to be gone. And the people who are still going to be there need to get the credit for this. They're the sustainers of the effort that we may have helped start. So that was a sort of missionary work 101 or philanthropy 101 mistake I made. Here I'm sharing my mistake with you in the hopes that you will be able to use that and avoid that mistake. But that's, it's not about us. It's not about us. All right, we're going to wrap up the controversy a little bit. Western standards of need versus local standards. Now, do I take my Homewood, Mountain Brook, New York criteria for what people need to survive into a situation? Or do I take or be more aware of what their definition of need is and then respond accordingly? Well, I'd like to read you something from Walking with the Poor. This book is essentially a textbook written by a professor at Fuller Seminary. And you can tell, I normally dog-ear pages when I want to go back and study something. I don't know if you can see, but I bet it almost looks like every third page is dog-eared in this. It took me, some pages I had to read 3 times before I really absorbed all that was going on. So it's pretty heavy-duty stuff. Well-researched. It happens to be from seminary, but includes all areas of research in how to do transformational development, which is helping people and then change their communities. And here's some things that this says on this topic. And this was a study by the World Bank. Working with the advice of Robert Chambers, a team of researchers was sent out to listen to over 60,000 of the world's poorest people. Pretty good sample set. In the early 2000s, the Voices of the Poor Project published 3 books with the team's findings. Working down, more surprising was the finding that having enough materially for a good life does not mean asking for very much. And the level of what they're asking for was surprising in how low it was. Many of the expressions of well-being were relational. Social well-being seems central to human well-being for the poor. The desire to be able to take care of one's family, harmony within the family and community, having friends, and helping others showed up regularly in the interviews. Jeffrey, Nancy's son, who did some volunteer work in Costa Rica, and he tells a story about these people who woke up before he did, going to work, working extremely hard, and then he's doing what he did, and he's in the hammock, which was his bed, and seeing them at night, going back, just happy as can be, joyful, and thinking, how can these people be happy with what they're having to do in their lives, and they had very little, and all, and that had a major impact on him. Less expected by the researchers, many of the manifestations of well-being were psychological in nature. A desire to feel better about oneself and a wish for a sense of dignity and respect were heard. Peace of mind, lack of anxiety, being God-fearing, and being happy or satisfied with life were named as elements of human well-being. Somewhat to the surprise of the Western researchers, and this was not a faith-based research project, this was the World Bank, a spiritual life and religious observance are woven into other aspects of well-being. So this, and it goes on, and this study has ended up with some secular organizations are to do the right thing for much of the world. One needs to attend to the spiritual needs of the people. And that was one of the surprises of that study. I'm going to come back to that in a minute on sort of dignity and things like that. So we've got to watch out for putting our standards on other people. Got to know the culture. Again, it gets back to focus, knowing the area to which you're giving, the people, the causes. You've got to know this stuff to be effective. And you can only do it with focus. Program helps in relief mode. Too long before moving to rehabilitation and development. All right. This is a book that rocked my cage in giving, and it helped me reinvent my potential with thinking about philanthropy and fundamental precepts that I had that were wrong. It's called When Helping Hurts, How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself. And the forward happens to be, Nancy and I happen to go to the Church of Brook Hills, and the forward is by David Platt, who used to be the senior pastor there. And here's a model that I'd like to read to you. A helpful first step in thinking about working with the poor in any context, whether it's the UF, Fairfield, or Cairo, or anywhere in between, is to discern whether the situation calls for relief, rehabilitation, or development. In fact, the failure to distinguish among these situations is one of the most common reasons that poverty alleviation efforts often do harm. He didn't say, don't work. He said, do harm. Relief can be defined as the urgent and temporary provision of emergency aid to reduce immediate suffering from a natural or man-made crisis. As pictured in this diagram, when a crisis such as the Indonesian tsunami strikes at point 1, people are nearly or even completely helpless and experience plummeting economic conditions. There is a need to halt the free fall, to stop the bleeding, and this is what relief attempts to do. The key feature of relief is a provider-receiver dynamic in which the provider gives assistance. often material to the receiver, who is largely incapable of helping himself at the time. Important point, incapable of helping himself at that time. The Good Samaritan's bandage of the helpless man who lay bleeding along the roadside is an excellent example of relief applied appropriately. Now, I'm going to stop this for a moment. Remember, what is need? We have to bring our non-Western and contextual definition of need to this situation to understand where the relief needs to stop. Okay? Rehabilitation begins as soon as the bleeding stops. It seeks to restore people and their communities to the positive elements of their pre-crisis conditions. The key feature of rehabilitation is a dynamic of working with the tsunami victims. Now it's not giving to, they're helpless. Now it's working with them as they participate in their own recovery, moving from point 2 to point 3, where they were. Again, with. Not to, but with. Development is a process of ongoing change that makes all the people involved, both the helpers and the helped, closer to being in right relationship with God, self, others, and the rest of creation. In particular, as the materially poor develop, they are better able to fulfill their calling, glorifying God, by working and supporting themselves and their families with the fruits of that work. Development is not done to people or for people, but with people. So this is a context for, we tend to have, we say, oh gosh, we'll keep giving and giving and giving for relief, when we're beyond the point of where we go too far. We build dependence, we build, that people think that they should get, and get stuff, and so it can hurt. So that's one important element there. So we have to watch out for our Western needs messing up when we stop certain types of help. All right, this may be the most controversial one of all. It's community development versus transformational development. And there's one expression that this morning one fellow came up and said this is really a big thing that he remembered. And it was changing communities, changing who lives there. Changed people, change communities. So with community development, what that is, let's say, cleaning the trash, making the neighborhood look better, refurbishing buildings, building some new buildings, bringing in the artists, trying to revitalize the community. What that ends up doing is the opposite of what you're trying to do if you're trying to help the poor. What it causes, the poor have to move out of that community. And then they go to a new community that haven't been there. Their family may have been there for generations in the old community. It just disrupts them, hurts them. Transformational development, on the other hand, is a character-focused process of changing people, and then they will change their community. And I had somebody, when I was having this, I won't say a debate, but this ended up being a supportive comment, where a fellow said, you can improve the education, but if you don't work on character, you'll have more educated thieves. And he was being somewhat flippant, but he said it's about character. So change communities, change who lives there, change people, change communities. This process, transformational development, it requires a different type of donor, board member, volunteer, because it can take 25 years. 10, 15, 25 years. It's not now, in some areas of philanthropy, there are more immediate results. It's easier to identify the cause, and you can go, okay, very focused, and okay, we're going to work on this cause together with the people or whoever's involved in that. when you're working on a community, focused on a community, it brings in all kinds of different areas, and it requires a holistic effort. And it takes time. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes grace. It takes 5 failed attempts, because you really want them to come up, the community to come up with the ideas on how to do these things. Not what is called the snowstorm. Let's say if you're helping a black community, the trite expression is you have the snowstorm coming in from over the mountain to the black community and say, well, okay, well, we know how this can be done better. No. The community leads the way. And you have to be there to earn the right to even listen to their conversations. And you have to be there long enough to earn that right to even just hear their conversations. And then you have to do enough there and continue to be committed to participate in the conversations and influence the conversations. This goes to missionary work. I mean, the days of missionaries going abroad and trying to walk around a town and say, hey, I want to share the gospel with you. I mean, those days are over. Missionaries have been sent out there to lie without integrity. They may have a job for 3 hours out of the week, but the people there know that that's not what you're really there for. You've got to go with integrity. Go with the job. Go with, just a permanent. I'm not speaking against short-term mission trips, because we go on them, but their short terms help set the foundation for the possibility of a mid and long-term mission trip. But go there, don't lie, even in the hard-to-reach places. But it's about this one. It's about character, and unfortunately, 80. I'm going to hazard a guess. 80 to 90% of work in this area is community development. It's not transformational development. Sadly, in Birmingham and in most every city, most of it's charity. It's not philanthropy. That's why there's so much potential in trying to work on our community being more philanthropic. All right, I'm going to end the circumstances or the examples with a little bit of a downer, but it ends up with a good ending. And it comes from a story that's in here. And the timing of this is propitious, let's say. It's providential. Many of the churches, and you'll see malls, whatever, may have an angel tree where you sign up for a tree and get some presents for a child, a family. Well, there's this church in an unnamed city, not Birmingham, that thought that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to start this initiative to help give gifts at this time of year because the children otherwise would not have a Christmas. Okay? So they did that. They collected all kinds of toys, and they went out in this Section 8 housing community and delivered gifts. And when they knocked on the doors and they opened the doors and they said, "Merry Christmas," and presented these gifts, and the children were just screaming in glee, and the mother was just so excited to see this. And their children were going to have gifts, and having some people come that cared about them. And it just seemed like an absolutely wonderful experience. But after doing this for several years, they noticed, we know their fathers there, they're men in the lives of these children. Where are they? So they did some research. And what they found out was that when they knocked on the door and they opened the door, the word got out that they were coming with the gifts. The fathers were going out the back door in shame. So they could not provide for their family. And these outsiders had to do that. It hurt the family. Well-intentioned, out of love, out of care, but they didn't consider the overall context within which they were doing this. But it did cause them to rethink what they're doing. And so, I guess the Christmas Village is what we have here. I believe it's the name of it. put it in a different context, and invite those same people. Come here, volunteer to help us with this. And what it is that the parents get to go through and they have a voucher and they can pick some gifts for their family and then take them home themselves. But they need to volunteer there. They need to earn this right to do that. So, as this book said, that they were a profound desire to feel better about oneself and a wish for a sense of dignity and respect. Spend an hour or two volunteering to earn the right to be able to go through and get some gifts for your child, and then you take them home to your children. So you've got to know the context within which you are doing this. Understand it. And again, that comes from focus, knowing the area that within which you're trying to work. Okay, so how's that? I mean, I'm just going to do the 19. There's some others. I don't have them prepared here, but other examples. Is this resonating? Is this... Okay. All right, well, let's go to the next section. We're just about finished. The process to move to philanthropic giving. And remember, crawl before you walk and walk before you run. Don't set yourself up. All right, those of you who are perfectionists, don't set yourself up for failure. But think, okay, I've got to do this exactly right from the start. You won't, especially if you're taking risks, which you need to do. But sit down and pick or affirm your top areas of passion or interest. Decide how much time and money you're willing to commit to philanthropy, in rough terms. And by the way, number one, it can be quite general because as you do, and I can get you these slides if you'd like them. But if you can work from general, and as you learn about the area, you will get more and more specific over time. So it's okay to be broad and experiment with some of these areas. And how much time? Rough allocation, the percentage of time in each area. You may say, we really like this one area, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time. But you know what? This other area has real potential for our family, and let's just start learning about this, and it may become a bigger area. But just get a rough allocation. And this is all about being intentional and judging, being able to judge how you're doing. Are you following your own commitments? So commit to learning who is doing what and doing it well in these areas. Again, standards of assessing how well you're doing, just like anything we do in life. And then decide how to involve your family. Stages, complete immersion, grandchildren. What's the definition of family? Are the outlaws part of family? Are they in-laws? I mean, how do you do that? In blended families, is everybody included? Not. Visit the agencies. So we give you the site visit item. That's part of just learning your area. By the way, if you have they will give you if you're going to give $5,000, they'll give you a tour. I mean, they will help, and you don't even have to say that, and they will give you a tour in most cases. But and they may want to ascertain, maybe qualify you as a giving lead. But you'll be surprised that they were willing to show you and give you on a tour with smaller amounts of money than you might realize. Start, and then go ahead and start doing it. Start giving your time and money, and with regular assessments of the efficacy of those gifts. Organizations are not used to dealing with philanthropists, and so they may have some adjustments to make with you. All right. Let's say you're asked to give money. What do you say? Well, here's what I generally say. Say, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to help this organization that's very important to you. And I bet I don't gamble, bet I don't mean to bet, but if I would assume that it's a good one because you're involved in it. However, my wife and I have been through a process where and we're still going through different times, but we are focused on certain areas of giving. And your area of the environment is not in our area of giving. And I really need to honor what my wife and I have been through and the commitment that we've made to this process. So I'm sorry, I cannot give to that area. However, if I have friends and I learn that the environment is really important to them, I will refer them to you and say, I know somebody who's very involved in this, and so forth and so on. So what they've just heard is that we're not going to give money. How do they normally respond? I'd say 8 times out of 10, they don't say something, oh, you're not going to give? Oh, okay, well. No, they say, tell me more about what your wife and you did. How did you decide? That's what I get with that. And that is the beginning, their questions, that is the beginning of teaching them some of how to move from charity to philanthropy and the joy of giving more effectively. And so, if you're soliciting money, don't do it by agency. Don't lead with your closing that you effectively want to do or the specifics of what you want. Learn about the person and where their interests are. And you may want to be a connector. And this was a radical, I'd say for an institution development department at a local university. I said, if you all could focus on being connectors, you will get more money than doing it the way you are. Have somebody who's involved in the heritage process has raised $2 billion for the Boy Scouts and $8 to $9 billion for other organizations. And using the heritage process when people discover. But he's not doing it to raise money, but that just comes out of it because a lot of people want to give and give more effectively. He happens to work for the Boy Scouts, and it's a very effective way to raise money, but he's a connector too. And so that's radical for a development department to try to be a connector and be the place you go to find out who's doing a good job in your area. But it's one of my ideas that didn't take off. But solicit by area of interest, and then you can work toward, if that person's interested in your area, then you can go to the next step. Establish relationships in this area, do some connection, tell them about your process, offer to introduce them to your network. If you find that somebody is interested in your area, say, okay, here's my network, here's some books on this particular area that I thought was great, and just help them so they don't have to waste time doing what you did to get up to speed. You can help them be more focused in their learning. Tell them about some of these points that you've heard today, and start their discomfort and their openness to change. Most people don't even know these differences. And just keep this in this room, but had a person from the morning say, I wish that I could get you in front of the donors of this community because they have to hear this, even though you might be thrown out of the room in some cases. Because some of what I've said has been quite controversial. So in conclusion, charitable gifts are great. They really are in the charitable process, and sometimes it's a requirement to move to philanthropy, but philanthropy is ultimately better. Make it formal, just like anything else. It takes commitment, intentionality, more formal. It just doesn't happen naturally. It takes excellence, a sense of being a good steward. Eat the elephant one bite at a time. It's a multi-year process to get to philanthropy, and you will get better and better at it. Don't expect the perfection, and commit to starting today. And this time of year is great for starting this because, just like the retail industry, 40% of sales in the retail industry happen between Thanksgiving or a little bit before Thanksgiving and about January 6th. 40% of the whole year happens in that short period. Well, the same is true in giving. You know, we're all going to get more solicitations at the end of the year. People saying, okay, I need my tax deduction or whatever. However they do it, but a lot of it happens now. I don't know if you all see more. You see a lot more in this time of year. There was a National Christian Foundation, Alabama chapter. Their founders, Tom Bradford, is the organizer of it with his son Jim working there. And so it happens now. So this is a good time to just practice. You make some mistakes and just start and make that commitment. And you and your family will get better at it every year. So I just wondered, did any of you have any either takeaways or stories that would either sort of refute or add to what I've said? Does this make sense? I mean, what? So, yes, Brian.
I was struck, I don't know if anybody else was, by the similarities in a number of the points with child rearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, rather than just rescuing your kid, addressing the single behavior rather than the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of them, but a lot of them.
I think that this is very much in alignment with child rearing, and it looks like child rearing too. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Making the hard choices.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Emmett.
Would you say more about the heritage process?
The heritage process is a process where families grow together through children through some pre-inheritance experiences and improved communication. And it starts with an exploration of what happens when it's working well. And that is where there's a transference of values in the family, that the values that the family would like to embrace, if they're not there, are experienced or start learning. And if that is a goal of them, and if I'm going to back up a little bit. There are 11 behaviors of successful legacy families. And this is from research. And that's a whole nother presentation. But this is from research at the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and other famous legacy families, and those that are infamous in doing it poorly, like the Vanderbilts, where there's a bankruptcy in the second generation. So what did the successful ones do and the other ones not do? Well, number one on that list of 11 is communication, effective family communication. And if you don't have that, you've got your arms tied behind your back to try to do the other 10. And the heritage process that leads towards a meeting where you begin working on family communication in a safe environment. How do you get there? Well, Diana would interview, let's say, the G1, the oldest generation, and ask them about stories of the family, and then why those stories are important. And then once you start hearing these stories, then values start, the coalescence of values, it starts happening. And say, okay, well, this family is a very resilient family in the face of adversity. This family admires education. Some of the stories of Nancy's family and education, coming from a family member who was raised in a mining camp, who was able to, with a husband, educate 4 children, 2 of whom had graduate degrees and worked through education. My mother-in-law, believes this country is great, and anybody with ambition and drive and all can do it. And so they have, so education is part of both of our families. Again, another combination that works for us. So you do that interview. There may be a transcript of that, or a movie, video, or something like that of those interviews, and edited, or just a transcript of those interviews. And then there's a heritage statement, and the heritage statement is sort of the highlights of the stories, which stories were important, why they're important, what values, and then a vision for the family. It's not to impose it on the next generations, but it's to be a vision of this generation, to be preserved for a long time. Now, that then moves to a family meeting, and there's a lot of preparation for that meeting. And that first meeting is one where there's sort of a buffet line of different tools and techniques, and and my children have been through this, and we all learned a lot about each other, because these stories and the exercises you go through, my children had more mature ears and a different perspective on life than when they might have heard stories earlier, and we'll have maybe even yet again. Kent's expecting a second child in January. And so with children and raising children, that gives additional perspective and reasons for needing sleep and other things as one gets older. But so that's where it ends. And then there's sort of a curriculum of family meetings once a year of subjects that the family, the first 5 are kind of laid out as sort of typical, but then the family can decide, okay, we want to learn more about compassion, or we want to learn more about leadership in the family and supporting each other, or we want to learn about this, and then they design a meeting to do that. So we just facilitate the process. So, well, just quickly, and then we can end. I would say this is the spectrum. This one would be, I think, a great book to ultimately read sometime, to really break preconceived notions. It really broke some preconceived notions of mine, and I would recommend this one. These two are more textbooks, and this one, as I said, like a business school textbook, but it's very good. And then this one is a lot of, this is the one that, you've got to be well rested, and you're going to be able to sign up for these. It's called Walking with the Poor, Money Well Spent, and we will send you one of these books if you'd like one. And this one, it took me 3 times sometimes to read a page and absorb what was in the book. So it's heavy duty, but it is challenging, it is comprehensive, and it's including all kinds of research. And we're learning a lot more about how to help people than we used to know just 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, I appreciate you all spending your time at this busy and increasingly busy time of year. And thank you very much. Oh, please give us, we've got some cards to assess the presentation, and we'd really appreciate the feedback. Okay, thank you.